I was halfway through stacking firewood when I saw her SUV creeping up the gravel drive like it was stalking something. I already knew who it was. Nobody else drove a pearl white Escalade into the woods wearing oversized sunglasses and a permanent scowl. Sure enough, the doors swung open and out stepped Margaret Cleary, president of the Ridgepine Lake HOA and self-declared queen of property order. "Xander Steele," she called out like she was summoning a dog. "We need to talk, now." I wiped my hands on my jeans and leaned against the porch railing. "Afternoon, Margaret. What brings HOA royalty out to the edge of the world?" She didn't laugh. She never did. "This cabin," she said, gesturing like she was unveiling a crime scene, "is not compliant with HOA access protocols. I need a key. As president, I'm entitled to full access to all structures within Ridgepine jurisdiction." I couldn't help but laugh. "You want a key to my cabin?" She crossed her arms. "It's not just your cabin, Mr. Steele. It falls within Ridgepine's extended boundary overlay approved last spring. The overlay that got rejected by the county." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, I read the board minutes. You tried to sneak it through without notifying homeowners." Her lips curled, but she kept her voice syrupy. "That's a matter we're revisiting. In the meantime, I need that key. Today." I walked down the steps and stopped a few feet from her. "This cabin's off limits, Margaret. It's registered with the Department of Homeland Security as a federal emergency response shelter. You try to open that door without clearance, they'll have you in cuffs before you can say board meeting." Margaret scoffed. "That's absurd. There's no such registration." I turned and walked over to the metal pole near the porch. I flipped open the weatherproof box and pointed to the bright yellow sticker inside. "Federal Emergency Use Only, DHS ID R5942TS. "I don't put bumper stickers on my cabin for fun," I said. She squinted at the label, then looked back at me, clearly rattled. "Even if that were true, the HOA still has the right to inspect." "No, they don't. Not on Federal Reserve property. Not without a warrant. And trust me, DHS doesn't hand those out to HOA presidents." Margaret's face flushed red, but she wasn't used to losing arguments. "I'll have my attorney review this. If you're hiding anything illegal in there, like a FEMA cache and radio relay equipment," I said, "go ahead, call someone. I've got the paperwork ready." She got back in her Escalade with all the grace of someone who just stepped in something unpleasant. As she revved down the drive, I saw her talking furiously into her Bluetooth headset. Probably calling her vice president or maybe her lawyer. That woman had no idea what she'd just kicked. This wasn't just about a key. Margaret Cleary had been pushing HOA boundaries for months, illegally annexing land, issuing fines that didn't exist, and trying to bully folks into silence. But this time, she pushed too far. This cabin wasn't just my retreat, it was a federal asset. And now, I had the perfect reason to drag her entire operation into the light. The next morning, I found a courier envelope wedged under my windshield wiper. Inside was a cease and desist letter with the Ridgepine Lake HOA letterhead, signed by their legal counsel, a guy named Raymond Ellis. It accused me of obstructing community oversight and refusing lawful access to shared-use structures. The kicker: they were threatening to fine me $1,000 per day until I turned over the cabin key. I read it twice, then folded the letter neatly and slid it into the folder I kept in my truck labeled Idiocy, Exhibit A. That folder was getting thick. I headed straight to the county records office. The clerk, a guy named Dylan who wore ear gauges and a Wu-Tang hoodie, looked up from his screen when he saw me. "Back again. Let me guess. Ridgepine's trying to annex your outhouse now." I set the envelope on the counter. "Worse. They're threatening daily fines for not giving them access to a building they don't even have jurisdiction over." He chuckled. "You're joking." I pulled out a printed copy of the county zoning map, time-stamped from 3 weeks ago. Still marked as private property outside HOA lines. They tried to redraw the overlay last March but never filed the environmental impact report, so the county rejected it. That rejection notice is on page 3. Dylan scanned it, then let out a low whistle and reached behind the counter. "You want a certified copy? 3, please." "I've got a feeling I'll need spares." He slid the documents into a stamped envelope and handed them over. "You're not the only one they've been harassing, you know. The Pattersons from Lakeview got fined for painting their mailbox. HOA claimed it violated visual harmony standards, whatever that means." "Means Margaret didn't like the color," I said. Back at the cabin, I made 3 phone calls. First to my friend Kendra, who worked in the DHS Legal Compliance Division. Second to the Ridgepine County Sheriff's Office. And third to a retired judge named Morris Langley, who played poker with my dad for 20 years and owed me a favor. By noon, I had a plan. And it wasn't just about protecting my own property anymore. The sheriff's deputy, a no-nonsense woman named Tessa Garvey, showed up around 2. She parked her cruiser beside the shed and got out, adjusting her utility belt. "Mr. Steele, we got your call. You mentioned unauthorized boundary enforcement and possible document fraud." "Yep, got all the paperwork here." "And something else you should see." I led her around the side of the cabin to the small trail cam mounted in the pine tree. I popped out the SD card and loaded the footage onto my laptop. We watched as Margaret, flanked by 2 HOA board members I recognized from the last town hall, walked right up to the cabin 2 nights ago, flashlights in hand, and tried to jimmy the back door with what looked like a lockpick. Tessa watched the clip twice, saying nothing. "That's criminal trespass," she said finally, "and attempted unlawful entry. They claimed they had authority under a boundary overlay that never passed. I've got certified maps and the zoning denial from the county. Want copies?" She nodded. "I'll need to open an investigation." "You mind if I take that footage?" Already backed it up to 3 drives. "Take this one." She slipped the USB into her pocket and made a few notes in her field pad. "Expect follow-up from our investigations unit. And if they try to step foot on your land again, call us immediately. Appreciate it." After she left, I sat down at my desk and started putting together a packet. Not just copies of the zoning maps and letters, but a chronological breakdown of every overreach Margaret and her board had attempted in the past 6 months. I included screenshots from the HOA's own newsletter, which bragged about expanding jurisdiction and streamlining resident compliance. They'd even published a piece suggesting that certain properties would be better off under Ridgepine's direct care, for the good of the community. What they really meant was, "We want control and we're betting you won't fight back." The next step was the emergency town council meeting. I got on the agenda with help from Judge Langley, who still had pulled around here. The council chambers were packed that Thursday evening. Half the town had heard about the incident by then. Margaret sat in the front row, flanked by her lawyer and 2 board members. She looked calm, but her jaw clenched every time someone in the audience whispered. I approached the microphone. "My name is Xander Steele. I live just outside the Ridgepine HOA boundary legally per county zoning. Last week, members of the HOA attempted to gain access to my federally designated emergency response cabin without authorization. When I declined to give them a key, they returned under cover of darkness and attempted forced entry. I have video evidence of this, which has already been submitted to the sheriff's office." Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret straightened in her seat but didn't speak. The HOA then issued me a cease and desist letter, demanding access based on a boundary overlay that was rejected by the County Planning Commission due to procedural violations. They've threatened to fine me $1,000 per day. I have certified documents proving their claim is false. Furthermore, I've gathered signed statements from 8 other residents who have experienced similar overreach in the last 6 months. I handed the packet to the council clerk. "I'm asking this council to initiate a formal review of Ridgepine Lake HOA's recent actions and to consider a motion to suspend their charter pending investigation." Margaret stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. Sit down, Mrs. Cleary," said Councilman Reyes, one of the few officials Margaret hadn't managed to charm or coerce. "You'll have your chance." The council voted unanimously to review the HOA's charter and freeze any enforcement actions pending the outcome. Margaret's expression was unreadable, but her lawyer leaned over and whispered something that made her eyes narrow. Outside the chamber, a crowd gathered around me, folks thanking me, sharing their own stories. A veteran named Carlton showed me a photo of the citation he got for unauthorized flagpole height. A nurse named Dana said she was fined for emergency vehicle obstruction after parking her ambulance in her driveway overnight. They were tired of being intimidated. That night, I sent an encrypted packet to Kendra at DHS. She called me the next day, her voice unusually serious. "Xander, I ran the footage and the letter through our legal team. You're not just dealing with HOA overreach. If they tried to enter a federally registered structure, that's a violation of Title 18, Section 111. That's interfering with federal operations. We're forwarding this to the U.S. Attorney's Office." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "So this goes beyond local now, way beyond. If they pushed this boundary with you, who knows what else they've done." I sat back in the chair, letting that sink in. Margaret had picked the wrong cabin and the wrong guy to push around. And now, her little suburban empire was about to face scrutiny from places she'd never even considered. This wasn't just about my property anymore. This was about every homeowner Margaret had bullied, every fine she'd fabricated, every rule she twisted to tighten her grip. And I was far from done. 2 days after the town council meeting, I stepped out onto the porch just as a black sedan pulled off the ridge road and parked beside the tree line. A tall man in a navy suit stepped out, followed by a woman in a dark blazer with a badge clipped to her belt. They scanned the cabin, then looked at me. "You must be Mr. Steele," the man said. "I'm Special Agent Whitaker with the U.S. Attorney's Office. This is Agent Ruiz from the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General." I nodded and opened the gate. "You're here about the Ridgepine file. We reviewed your submission and corroborated several details with county records and the sheriff's office. We also obtained a search warrant for the Ridgepine HOA's administrative office," Ruiz said. "We executed it this morning." I leaned against the porch post, watching a hawk circle overhead. "Find anything useful?" Ruiz opened a folder and passed it to me. Inside were photocopies of ledgers, digital correspondence, and a spreadsheet labeled compliance revenue targets. It listed addresses and projected fine amounts for the next quarter, including my cabin still labeled pending jurisdiction. We recovered internal emails between President Cleary and her treasurer discussing how to fast-track annexation paperwork by bypassing sluggish county protocols, Whitaker said. One email explicitly states they plan to fabricate HOA approval votes by creating false homeowner proxies. I closed the folder. So that's wire fraud. And conspiracy to commit municipal fraud, Ruiz added. We also found a draft contract between Ridgepine Lake HOA and a private security firm, one that's been flagged in other investigations for operating without proper state licenses. "Let me guess," I said. "They were planning to use them to enforce their fake jurisdiction." "Looks that way," Whitaker confirmed. The contract included language about resident compliance actions, which is not standard language for any licensed security service. Ruiz stepped forward. "We'll need to take another look inside your cabin, not for inspection, but to confirm DHS registration and verify the equipment listed in the federal asset log. Standard procedure when an incident escalates to this level." I unlocked the reinforced door and led them inside. The cabin was modest bare wood walls, a steel-framed cot, solar backup systems, and a locked cabinet containing a radio relay and field medical gear. Ruiz matched every item against her checklist, then signed the confirmation slip. "Everything's accounted for," she said, handing me a copy. As they prepared to leave, Whitaker paused. "We're preparing to file charges." Once we finish reviewing the seized materials, several Ridgepine board members will likely face indictments. You should expect subpoenas for testimony. Happy to provide it, I said. Later that afternoon, I drove into town. Normally, I avoided the Ridgepine HOA office, but this time I parked directly across the street and went into the bookstore next door. The owner, Marla, was behind the counter unpacking a box of new releases. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," she said without looking up. "They needed stirring." She nodded toward the window. "Federal agents were in there all morning. Cleary didn't show up, but her treasurer tried to slip out the back. They walked him right into a black SUV. I picked up a copy of a local history book and leafed through it. You ever wonder how people like that take over in the first place? Most folks don't realize what's happening until it's too late," she said. "They think rules are rules. Until the rules only apply one way." I paid for the book and left. As I stepped outside, I saw Margaret's Escalade parked awkwardly across two spots near the post office. She was inside shouting at a clerk behind the glass partition, waving a stack of papers. Her voice carried all the way across the lot. "I demand to know why federal agents are interfering with our internal matters. This is harassment." The clerk didn't answer. Just gestured at a posted notice behind the counter. "All inquiries regarding federal investigations must be directed to the U.S. Attorney's Office." Margaret stormed out, nearly colliding with a man carrying a toddler. She stopped when she saw me, eyes narrowing like she was trying to burn a hole in my forehead. "You're behind this," she said. "You've poisoned the minds of this entire community." I pulled my sunglasses down and looked her dead in the eye. "No, Margaret, you did that all by yourself." "I just turned on the lights." She stepped forward, but her lawyer, Raymond Ellis, appeared from behind the building and grabbed her arm. "Don't say another word," he hissed. "You've already said too much." She shook him off, but didn't argue. They got into the Escalade and sped off, tires squealing. That evening, I called Dana, the nurse who'd been fined for parking an ambulance in her own driveway. She'd been working with other residents to organize a petition to dissolve the Ridgepine HOA entirely. "We've got over 70 signatures," she said. "All verified homeowners, not fake proxies." "Make sure you get them notarized," I said, "and submit copies to both the county and state registrar. If this goes to court, you'll want an airtight record. We're also pooling funds for a civil suit," she added. "Loss of income, mental distress, illegal fines, it's all going in." "You've got my backing," I said. "Let me know when you file." "I'll submit a witness affidavit." The next morning, a story broke on the local news site. The headline read, "Federal investigation targets Ridgepine HOA for fraud and unlawful enforcement." It included a photo of two board members being escorted out of the HOA office in cuffs. By noon, residents were gathering outside the community center. Someone set up a folding table with coffee and donuts. People brought copies of their HOA fines and statements. One guy even showed up with a 3-ring binder labeled extortion ledger filled with receipts and correspondence. I stood near the edge of the crowd, watching as neighbors who'd never spoken before compared notes and swapped stories. Dana passed out flyers for the petition. Carlton, the veteran, brought a portable speaker and played a recording of the HOA's vice president admitting during a recorded phone call that some fines were more about discouraging non-compliant attitudes than actual rule violations. The mood wasn't angry. It was determined. Later that week, the county clerk confirmed that the petition to dissolve the Ridgepine Lake HOA had met the legal threshold to trigger a formal hearing. If the judge approved, the board would be stripped of authority, and a third-party trustee would be appointed to audit their finances. The final blow came 3 days later. A sealed indictment was announced by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Charges included fraud, attempted unlawful entry, conspiracy against federal property, and falsification of municipal records. Margaret Cleary was named as the lead defendant. I didn't celebrate. There wasn't much joy in watching someone implode, just a grim satisfaction in seeing justice finally catch up. On the evening of the hearing, I walked the ridge trail behind the cabin. The air was cool and the clouds rolled low over the treetops. I paused at the overlook, watching the town lights flicker on in the valley below. This cabin had always been a place of quiet, a sanctuary. But it had become something more. It had drawn out the rot hiding behind HOA letterheads and boardroom smiles. It had forced people to pay attention, to stand up, to stop letting themselves be pushed around. And maybe, just maybe, it had reminded a few folks that power only works when people give it permission. The next day, I replaced the trail cam SD card, updated the relay system log, and locked the cabin door behind me. I didn't need to look over my shoulder anymore. The lights were on now, and Margaret Cleary was no longer the one holding the switch. The courthouse lobby buzzed with quiet tension the morning of the charter hearing. A line of residents stretched down the hall, most carrying folders of documents, photographs, or typed statements. A bailiff directed them into Hearing Room C, where Judge Noreen Cavallo would preside over the matter of Ridgepine Lake HOA's charter status. She had a reputation for being meticulous and unimpressed by theatrics, which didn't bode well for Margaret Cleary. I arrived just before proceedings began and nodded to Dana, who stood by the rear wall in a navy blazer, holding the petition packet. Her hand shook slightly, but her eyes were focused. Carlton was already seated near the front, his cane resting across his lap. The room had the air of a community that had finally realized its strength. Margaret entered through a side door with her legal team in tow. Her expression was unreadable, but she wore a charcoal gray suit that looked more courtroom than HOA luncheon. She didn't acknowledge anyone as she took her seat at the front table. Her lawyer, Raymond Ellis, shuffled papers and kept his eyes low. The judge entered promptly and adjusted her glasses as she scanned the docket. Today's hearing concerns allegations of misconduct, unlawful enforcement, and procedural fraud by the Ridgepine Lake Homeowners Association. We will begin with evidentiary statements from the petitioners, followed by testimony from named parties. Any attempt to grandstand or deflect from the matter at hand will result in immediate removal from this chamber. Dana stood when called. She walked to the center of the room, placed her folder on the podium, and spoke with quiet clarity. Your Honor, we are submitting a notarized petition signed by 74 Ridgepine homeowners, requesting dissolution of the HOA charter. Attached are receipts of unlawful fines, emails obtained via subpoena, and evidence of forged proxy votes used to pass resolutions without proper quorum. She handed the folder to the clerk, then stepped aside without drama. Judge Cavallo leafed through the documents, pausing once to annotate something. Thank you, Miss Mayor. Mr. Steele, you're listed as a primary witness in the federal investigation. Please approach. I stepped forward, suit collar tight around my neck. I didn't bring notes, I didn't need them. Your Honor, I own property adjacent to Ridgepine's boundary. The HOA attempted to claim jurisdiction over it using a zoning overlay that was rejected by the county 6 months prior. After I denied them access to a federally registered emergency response facility, members of the board attempted entry without warrant or legal grounds. That act triggered a federal investigation, now resulting in multiple indictments. The judge looked up from her notes. Are you prepared to submit testimony regarding that incident in criminal proceedings? Already have, Your Honor, and I've also submitted security footage, zoning maps, and communications from the HOA demanding access under fraudulent pretenses. She nodded, then addressed the defense table. Mr. Ellis, do you wish to respond? Ellis rose slowly, clearly weighing every word. Your Honor, while certain decisions made by the HOA leadership may have lacked procedural clarity, we dispute the characterization of criminal intent. The organization acted in good faith. Judge Cavallo's pen froze mid-sentence. Attempting to access a federal facility under false zoning claims is not good faith. Fabricating homeowner votes is not unclear procedure. You deny the authenticity of these documents? No, Your Honor. But we request that the court consider the possibility that these actions were the result of administrative disorganization rather than malicious purpose. At that, the gallery stirred. A woman near the back let out a quiet laugh that she tried and failed to stifle. Judge Cavallo tapped her gavel once. This is not a debate over intent, it is a matter of fact, and the facts are damning. She turned to Margaret. Mrs. Cleary, as president of the Ridgepine Lake HOA, do you have anything to say before I issue a ruling? Margaret stood, her hands perfectly still at her sides. What I did to maintain order, she said. Homeowners don't always understand what's best for the community. Sometimes leadership requires making hard decisions. You mean illegal decisions, Cavallo replied, her tone flat. Margaret didn't flinch. If I had to do it again, I would. The neighborhood was slipping into chaos. There's no chaos in Ridgepine, Mrs. Cleary, Judge Cavallo said. Only resistance to tyranny. With a final glance at the clerks, she adjusted her glasses and leaned forward. I find sufficient cause to dissolve the Ridgepine Lake HOA charter effective immediately. All enforcement actions initiated over the past 9 months are hereby voided. A court-appointed trustee will oversee the liquidation of HOA assets and audit all financial activity. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of forged votes and unauthorized property access to the district attorney's office for additional prosecution. The gavel dropped with a muted finality. Margaret sat down slowly. For the first time, her composure cracked, her jaw clenched, and her eyes darted to Ellis, who offered no reassurance. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors clapped one another on the back, exchanged contacts, and made plans to organize a new, voluntary neighborhood alliance, one based on transparency and mutual respect rather than control. Dana approached me near the courthouse steps. We're forming a community council, she said. No dues, no enforcement powers, just people looking out for each other. You in? I nodded. Count me in. 2 days later, the sheriff's department arrived at the Ridgepine HOA office with a court order. Deputies carried out boxes of financial ledgers, hard drives, and 2 large trash bags labeled Shredded July. Ellis tried to intervene but was warned off the premises. Margaret wasn't present. Rumor had it she'd left town the night of the hearing. Carlton hosted a backyard barbecue that weekend and invited the entire neighborhood. Someone brought a portable projector, and they played home videos of block parties from the early 2000s back, when Ridgepine had been a place of cookouts and kids' bike races, not citations and surveillance. I brought a cooler of bottled root beer and a stack of old photographs from when the cabin was first built. Dana found one of her father in the corner of one photo, hauling sandbags during a flood drill. I didn't know he helped build it, she said. He did more than that, I replied. He helped get it registered. He always said a community's only as strong as its quiet defenders. She looked around at the gathering. Then I think we're finally getting stronger. The federal trustee assigned to Ridgepine issued a report 2 weeks later. Among the findings, over $200,000 in unauthorized fees, 6 fake board votes, and a secret fund labeled compliance incentives that had been used to pay a private investigator to monitor non-compliant households. Ellis quietly resigned from practicing law in the state. Margaret, facing multiple felony charges, accepted a plea deal that barred her from holding any position of authority in any homeowners association for the rest of her life. The cabin stayed as it was untouched, secure, and ready. I updated the emergency relay software and installed a new satellite uplink, just in case. But the real change was down the hill, where Ridgepine was finally becoming a neighborhood again. People planted gardens without asking permission. Kids rode scooters down the sidewalks without worrying about noise violations. And the flag on Carlton's porch flew without commentary Order had returned, not the kind enforced by threat, but the kind built from trust. One evening, I stood on the ridge as the sun dipped below the pines. A hawk glided above the treetops, casting a shadow across the cabin roof. The wind carried the sound of laughter from the valley below, real, unfiltered, and free. Margaret had come with demands, threats, and a hunger for control. She left behind a cautionary tale and the key she wanted so badly. Still hanging, untouched, behind the steel-plated door.